My name is Jenna, and I've always loved living life to the fullest. After graduating from university, I moved to a nearby city to be closer to my friend Haley. She loved throwing parties at her new house every weekend. These were the kind of loud gatherings where music blasted, drinks flowed endlessly, and strangers mingled with friends to create a chaotic, yet lively rhythm of the night. I was always at the center of it all. I loved dancing, meeting new people, and eagerly looked forward to the next party. At one such party, I met a guy named Ben. He was sweet, with slightly messy brown hair and a friendly smile. Compared to the other loud and rowdy guests, he seemed surprisingly calm. We started talking, and it felt like he always knew the right thing to say to keep the conversation flowing. At some point, he asked for my number, and without much thought, I gave it to him. At first, everything seemed normal. Ben would text me occasionally, asking how my day went or suggesting we meet up for coffee. I saw it as friendly interest, especially after he mentioned that he'd recently moved to the city and was looking to make new friends. We chatted for a few weeks, but I never felt any romantic connection with him. To me, he was just a pleasant acquaintance. However, soon the first signs of something unusual began to appear. Ben knew details about my life that I hadn't shared with him. One day he mentioned my younger brother, even though I was sure I'd never brought him up. Another time, he sent me a photo of my old high school yearbook with the comment, "You were cute even back then." I had no idea how he got that photo. Trying not to overreact, I decided to keep my distance. I started responding to his messages less frequently and with shorter replies, but his interest only seemed to grow. He began texting more often, asking questions about where I'd been and who I was with. There was a hint of jealousy in his tone that made me uneasy. One evening, I went out for dinner with Haley and some old friends from university. It was great to see everyone again, but when I got home, I found dozens of messages from Ben. He was upset, asking why I hadn't invited him and accusing me of ignoring him. That was the last straw. I told him it would be best if we stopped communicating, to which he responded with several angry and even threatening messages. The next day, Ben was standing outside my apartment building. I don't know how long he had been there, but when he saw me, he started shouting, trying to justify his behavior. I quickly went inside and locked the door. After that, I blocked his number, but that didn't stop him. He began creating new social media accounts and texting me from unfamiliar numbers. Then things escalated. I started noticing his car parked near my house. One night I heard footsteps outside my window but didn't dare look out. The next morning, I found a bouquet of withered flowers on my porch along with a note. "I'm sorry, Jenna, I just want to talk." His presence was everywhere. I saw him reflected in shop windows, at the supermarket parking lot, and even at the gym I went to once a week. The scariest part began when he started sending me photos, pictures of me taken secretly. They showed me at work, walking down the street, or sitting in a cafe. Ben was following me, and it terrified me to my core. One time, he sent me a video taken through my bedroom window while I was sleeping. That's when I knew I needed help. I went to the police, but it was hard to prove anything. He had no criminal record, and his messages and photos were vague enough to not be considered concrete evidence. I felt helpless. A few days later, Haley called me and said she'd seen Ben at one of her parties, even though I had stopped attending them long ago. He was asking her about me, trying to find out where I lived now. That was the final straw. I decided to leave the city. I rented a small apartment in another area and tried to erase my online presence. I changed my phone number and deleted my social media accounts, hoping this would help me move on. For a few weeks, life was peaceful, and I almost believed that the nightmare was over. But one night, I heard a knock at the door. My heart sank as I looked through the peephole and saw nothing. When I opened the door, there was a note on the doormat. "You can't hide, Jenna." In that moment, I realized I might never escape the fear that he would find me again. I hired a private investigator who found out that Ben had lost his job and sold his apartment. No one knew where he was, which only made things worse. Now, I live in constant fear. I got a dog, installed cameras around my home, and bought multiple locks for my door. But every time I step outside, I look over my shoulder, scanning faces for any sign of him. This experience has changed my life forever. I can no longer trust people the way I used to. Even when there's no immediate threat, I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching me. I know he's out there somewhere. Maybe he's already found me and is just waiting for the right moment to reappear in my life. Working at the local coffee shop had always felt like a safe haven for me. People came in for quick breaks, escaping the city's chaos. I had grown accustomed to the endless stream of customers, always friendly, polite, maybe a little tired but harmless. It was a calm place where I felt secure until that day. It was an ordinary Tuesday. The coffee shop was half empty, soft music played in the background, and a light rain drizzled outside. I had just finished serving another customer when he walked in. At first glance, the man seemed completely ordinary. Tall, wearing a long black coat and an unremarkable gray hat. But something about him immediately made me uneasy. Maybe it was his gaze. He slowly scanned the coffee shop as if looking for something before his cold, emotionless eyes landed on me. He approached the counter, and I forced myself to smile, trying not to show my discomfort. "Good morning. What can I get for you?" I asked. He paused for a moment as though deliberating before speaking in a low, almost whispery voice. "Black coffee. No sugar." His voice was deep, almost monotone, but there was a strange edge to it that sent a chill down my spine. As I prepared his order, he never looked away. It wasn't a casual glance. It was something more intense, like he was studying me. When I handed him his cup, he didn't take it right away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly and asked, "Have you worked here long?" "Just a couple of months," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "I see," he said with a faint, unsettling smirk before walking to a table by the window. I tried to shake off the odd encounter, but my unease grew when I noticed he wasn't drinking his coffee. He just sat there, staring at me. Occasionally, his lips would move, as if he were whispering to himself. An hour passed, and he was still there, his coffee untouched. He watched as I served other customers, his presence making my heart race. I glanced at the clock, wishing I had an excuse to retreat to the back, but I was alone on this shift. Finally, I decided to confront him. Approaching his table cautiously, I asked, "Is everything okay? Can I help you with anything?" He slowly raised his glassy eyes to meet mine, smirking again before replying, "You should be careful. There are a lot of dangerous people out there." I froze, unsure of how to respond. His tone wasn't overtly threatening, but his words carried a sinister weight. I stepped back, muttering something about needing to check the register just to get away from him. Thankfully, after a few minutes, he stood up, put on his hat, and left without a word, leaving his untouched coffee behind. I exhaled in relief, but the uneasy feeling lingered. A few days passed, and I had almost forgotten about the strange man. But one evening, as I was walking home after closing the shop, I saw him again. He was standing at a street corner, lurking in the shadows, watching me. My heart sank as I realized he had been waiting for me. I quickened my pace, trying not to show my fear, but after a few blocks, I noticed he was following me. Panic surged through me, and I broke into a run. I knew I was only minutes away from my apartment, but the distance felt endless. Reaching my building, I fumbled with my keys, finally unlocking the door and slamming it shut behind me. But as I turned to catch my breath, I saw him through the glass door. His face was twisted into a chilling smirk, his eyes filled with cold madness. He tapped the glass slowly, almost mockingly, before pressing his face against the door and whispering, "I'll find you." Terrified, I rushed to my apartment and called the police. They assured me help was on the way, but every minute felt like an eternity. I barricaded myself in my bedroom, clutching a knife I had grabbed from the kitchen, straining to hear any sound. Then I heard it, a quiet creak. Someone was trying to open my front door. Tears streamed down my face as I gripped the knife, shaking, but determined to defend myself. The door burst open with a crash, and I heard slow, deliberate footsteps approaching my bedroom. When he burst into the room, I screamed and lashed out, plunging the knife into him. He froze, his eyes wide with shock, before collapsing to the floor, clutching the wound. At that moment, the police arrived, storming in and taking him into custody. Later, I learned he had been wanted for attacks on women in the area. If I hadn't panicked and fought back, I could have been his next victim. I still work at the coffee shop, but every night as I lock up, a tremor of fear runs through me. I can only hope that man will never return to my life. This story happened to me a few years ago when I was in college. I was in my second year, juggling classes and a part-time job. My daily routine was pretty predictable: morning lectures, a lunch break, afternoon classes, and evening shifts at a local coffee shop. During one of my morning classes, I met Eric. He was a new student, often asking questions and trying to befriend people. He seemed kind and friendly, so when he started sitting next to me in lectures and joining me during breaks, I didn't mind. We talked about coursework, movies, and music, just normal college topics. After a while, I noticed Eric giving me more attention than usual. He'd bring me coffee, claiming the barista got his order wrong, or offer me chocolate bars he said were extra. I didn't think much of it at the time, assuming he was just being nice. At the end of the fall semester, we went home for winter break, and I was glad to take a break from classes. A week later, however, I noticed a car parked across from my house. It stayed there longer than usual. At first, I thought it belonged to a neighbor, but then I started seeing it more frequently. One morning, as I was leaving to meet friends, the car window rolled down and Eric stepped out. He looked nervous and started mumbling something about being in the area and deciding to stop by to say hi. It struck me as odd since he lived on the other side of the city. Still, I brushed it off, not wanting to overthink it. After that, Eric began showing up wherever I was. I posted an Instagram story from my favorite coffee shop, and he, coincidentally, stopped by 10 minutes later. I went to the mall with a friend, and he suddenly appeared, saying he was shopping for a gift for his sister. It was all too strange, but he always had an excuse, leaving me unsure of how to respond. Things escalated after New Year's. One evening, while I was home alone, he showed up at my door. I heard a knock, looked through the peephole, and saw him holding a bouquet of flowers. He said he wanted to wish me a happy holiday. I told him I was busy and didn't open the door, hoping he'd leave. He stayed on the doorstep for several minutes before finally walking away. I stopped using social media to keep him from tracking my whereabouts, but Eric only became more persistent. He called me in the evenings, left messages, and even dropped off letters in my mailbox. When I ignored him, he began showing up at my house more frequently. One night, I saw a shadow outside my window and realized he was there again. I couldn't sleep, terrified he might try to break in. The next day, I went to the police. They listened, but said they couldn't do anything since he hadn't made any threats or broken the law. Eric was careful not to cross any lines that would get him in trouble. A few days later, I decided to end things once and for all. I called Eric and told him his behavior was scaring me and that I didn't want to see him anymore. He paused for a moment before saying, "You don't understand. I just want to help you." After that call, things only got worse. Eric started coming to my house every day, standing outside the building and watching me on the street. I felt trapped, too scared to leave my home. My parents noticed his car, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the whole truth. One evening, as I was walking home from work, I saw him waiting for me again. This time, he looked different. His eyes burned with madness, and I knew something had changed. I ran, trying to reach my building, but he caught up to me and grabbed my arm. I screamed, but the street was empty. Desperate, I broke free and ran to a nearby store. People inside heard my cries and called the police. Eric fled, but I knew it wouldn't be the end. When the police arrived, I gave a full statement and insisted they take action. Thankfully, there were witnesses who confirmed he had tried to grab me. That was enough evidence to press charges. Eric was arrested and later charged with stalking. I learned he hadn't just been targeting me. There were other girls he had been following as well. His obsession had turned into full-blown mania, and I was relieved to have escaped the worst. It's been a few years since then, but I still can't shake the feeling that someone might be watching me. Maybe it's just lingering fear, but I'm always on guard now. I've changed all my habits, stopped using social media, and constantly check my surroundings when I'm out. This experience changed me forever. I'm more cautious and reserved now, but maybe that's for the best.